as responding to COVID, and then a bit about our centennial celebration. And then we'll have time for questions. I put a little background information. It's interesting. I spent 24 years in a clinical and teaching and research career before I moved to hospital administration. And I've been doing hospital administration since about 2009. So for those of you who are good at math, I started when I was 6. So I want to clarify that. But had a lot of experience under my belt. And my focus had been coming out here, both running St. Joseph and Redwood Memorial and trying to have a real impact on the community. During COVID, I would say that all of my infectious disease background has been helpful. I actually had the privilege of working with Dr. Anthony Fauci as part of a AIDS clinical trial network across the country, and have been using both my connections with people in that world as well as my interest in what's happening with COVID to try to make sure that we are ready in every possible way. So that's a little bit about the background. What's really quite striking is that our hospital, St. Joseph Hospital, was actually founded 100 years ago, and it was in a similar circumstances. The Sisters of St. Joseph actually came in 1912 to teach and to help the community in different ways, but it was the 1918 flu pandemic that got them into healthcare. And so you look at this picture on the top of these sisters with their masks on, driving a car. They were really courageous pioneers. They were up for a challenge, a small group of people. And I don't think they were supposed to be driving, but they definitely took the attitude that they're going to do what they need to do, and ask for forgiveness later. So I think as we really face this national and international pandemic, somewhat heartened by a legacy of people who were very brave, had fewer resources by a long shot than we have today, who stepped up despite the challenge. As I mentioned, I'm in charge of both St. Joseph Hospital in Eureka and Redwood Memorial in Fortuna. When we look at COVID, the people around me have had to listen to COVID talks on a regular basis. But the Johns Hopkins website is something that you'll see on the news regularly, but it's really striking, and it looks like the kind of models people did when they worried about pandemics. But this is a snapshot of January 29th, 2020, when there were only 7,700 confirmed cases in the country. It shows Wuhan, China. It shows where we were starting to track the cases. I mean, and it's really rather stunning that when you go to just June 27th, where there's almost 10 million cases worldwide, with almost 2.5 million in the US, just the impact. And I know we all know this, and we're watching it, but it is it's really stunning that over such a relatively brief period, this has kind of transformed the world. Now, in Humboldt County, we've been quite fortunate, with the very first cases from late February related to some travel to China, and people were very, certainly very responsible, and a great collaboration between us at the hospital and public health. We sorted it out quickly, and then everything was quiet. And then we've seen these cases over time. We'll see a cluster related to travel. We'll see another cluster related to different travel typically, and then some secondary cases. And as of June 26th, this is kind of the distribution where about 17.8% were community transmission, almost 60% were related to contact with a known case. And really what that speaks to is that really excellent work by public health with identification and contact tracing and isolation has led to a lot of containment in Humboldt. But we know that that this is kind of exploding in the country right now, in California. And so our job is to try to do everything we can to contain it, at the same, be prepared to treat patients as they come in, and also to be prepared if there's bigger impact in the fall. We had started with some resources for the community as part of Providence. Providence St. Joseph Health has 51 hospitals that we call ministries across a wide geography. And actually the first case of COVID diagnosed in the country was up at in Everett at one of our hospitals. And we quickly got everyone together, our leaders got everyone together on a daily call. It was 7 days a week to try to coordinate response, make sure we had the right policies, try to figure out how to get PPE, look at clinical trials, look at things to help the community. And so this was kind of an example of where we try to be big and small at the same time, we say. We try to leverage the value of being part of a big network, things like this, when we'll talk about how we got clinical trials into Humboldt because of that, but also be small and being very locally responsive to our local community is really the goal. But if you look at our website, you'll see right here, there was a little tab, and it would take you to what was called a coronavirus assessment tool. It's still there. It's a little chat bot. Here says, I'm Grace, I'm here to guide you. But if you're a person who's got mild symptoms, you actually can go through the chat bot, and it can help advise, if you're 20 years old and you've got the sniffles, it'll say, maybe you should self-quarantine for 14 days, but you probably don't have to do anything. If you're 67 years old and you've got underlying lung disease and you've got 102 fever, it may say, do a virtual visit or come to the ER depending on your symptoms. But it's just one more piece of guidance. And in addition, we offered this. We know how hard it has been to get a primary care doc in Humboldt County. I know that St. Joseph Medical Group and Open Door were offering virtual visits and still do that. But in addition, we added the Providence virtual visit platform where there were 7,000 doctors across 7 states. So if your doctors here were busy, you could literally get a doc in Texas or Alaska to do a virtual visit to get started on your healthcare. In addition, there were patients who were well enough to stay home, but we're still vulnerable and we knew they could deteriorate. So we developed something where we give them a little kit where they have something to check their oxygen and their temperature, and they could be monitored safely at home, avoiding being in the hospital. But if there was a deterioration, we could tell them to come in. So I think that what's happened, the silver lining of COVID is that we've better leveraged virtual platforms and technology so that not everybody has to come into the hospital. But if people had to come into the hospital, we did something else, is we transformed one of the units at St. Joe's into a respiratory care unit. At its max, it could take 32 patients. In addition, we have capacity in other areas at an ICU. And the idea there was that we developed a team of people who really had expertise on using their personal protective equipment and how to care for these patients, and teams of people who wanted to be there. Fortunately, we didn't really need a unit this size, so we made it 10 beds and we made it 4 beds, but it's kind of an accordion so that if we need to develop this again, our engineers made all these rooms what are called negative pressure through a HEPA filter, so that we completely changed the airflow in addition to other isolation rooms we have available. The other thing that is just fascinating is that even though we are behind the redwood curtain, Providence started doing clinical trials. They were much more severely impacted in Washington and Oregon. And they had access to the Gilead remdesivir trial and some others, including some vaccine trials, and were able to open it up to other sites. And because of my clinical trial background, I immediately said, yes, we're in, because I recognize that certainly in my AIDS work, there are people alive today because they got access to investigational drugs. And I felt that this could be similar. So we enrolled a number of people in the remdesivir clinical trials, 2 of them before those trials completed. Certainly the trials have shown evidence of improved outcomes for patients on remdesivir. And then we've also put people on a trial of what's called COVID convalescent plasma, where we take plasma or blood from with its antibodies for people who have had the disease and give it to people who are sick. And there's some other trials that may come down the pike, but we do have the expertise to do trials locally. And then we have the kind of the backbone of a larger clinical trials infrastructure through St. Joseph Health in Northern California and our system. Really tried to do everything to be as prepared as possible. And I think that's all I have about COVID, and I can pause for a minute. Any specific questions around that? Okay, hearing none, I'll keep going. So the other thing we saw happen in COVID across the country is that we were seeing more people who had heart attacks at home, sometimes with bad outcomes. We saw some increased use in opioids where people had would have been scheduled for spine procedures or joint replacements, and recognized that while I think in Providence at one point we had treated about 1,200 people with COVID, it's more now, but then there were 108,000 who had surgeries canceled or care delayed. And so we've kind of been back saying, we need to be able to work in parallel. We have a path to take care of people with COVID and to screen, but we also need a path to take care of people who have other chronic or acute health conditions. And so, across our ministries, we are unique in the depth and breadth of our specialty services, where St. Joseph Hospital really serves as a regional medical center with some unique programs, very sophisticated cancer care with radiation therapy that, in part was made possible by incredible generosity of our donor community, where we had put in state-of-the-art linear accelerators that, where when they were put in, and really for quite some time, you couldn't get this unless you went all the way down to Stanford. Wasn't in Santa Rosa, wasn't in Napa, wasn't in the Bay Area. So a lot of talent there. We have an open heart surgery program and our what's called the STEMI Center. We have people available to go to our cath lab 24/7. In response to heart attacks. At the ER, we're a level 3 trauma center, so we have general surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, and neurosurgeons available again 24/7. We have the graduate medical education programs, the family medicine residency, and pharmacy training and nursing education, as well as the things you'll see on the other side of the slide, pain services, palliative care, rehab, both inpatient and outpatient, sleep center, women's childbirth center at both Redwood and St. Joe's, with a level 2 neonatal intensive care unit up at St. Joe's, and a lot of surgical services. So we have amazing depth and breadth. We often talk about that, when I first came, and actually when I interviewed, I just said, this is extraordinary rural medicine. And one of someone in our community kind of caught that line and has used it back at me. But it is really striking, kind of the depth and breadth we have available here. And we want to make sure the community's aware there are gaps, and we're constantly recruiting to get more primary care, to get additional cardiologists, but there's also tremendous depth, which is cool. We just signed a new interventional cardiologist, Dr. David Phillips. He's been working here since December, but decided to move here and stay. We're very excited about him. He joins Dr. Robert Locke and others, so that was exciting. Our cancer program, this is a picture of our tumor board, collaborative, personalized treatment among people of various specialties, surgeons and radiation doctors and chemotherapy doctors, and a lot of support, social workers and dietitians and nurse navigators to really help people through their path, palliative care teams. So there's a lot of great people there. I mentioned trauma, orthopedics. We have a bunch of specialty trained orthopedic surgeons, Dr. McGoldrick, who's fellowship trained in shoulder. We have people with fellowship training in total joints, ortho trauma. Dr. Carrillo is exceptionally well trained, so a lot of talent there. So we've opened up those services, and the way we've done it is we actually pre-screen all our patients coming in for surgeries, got a COVID test and get isolated before they come in. There's tremendous care in the operating room where people are using shields, and there's longer times and more robust cleaning between cases. So a lot of protections put in place, even in some of our outpatient treatment, like physical therapy now has to be socially distanced, different cleaning, in order to get people back into care. I know I'm talking fast. I feel like I've got a lot to share. So the last is just a little bit about our centennial celebration. I think that sometimes with big hospitals, that they can feel like big impersonal institutions, and yet they're made up of individuals that care for the community, one patient at a time, with care and compassion, really with a goal of creating a healing environment and caring for patients' mind, body, and spirit. You will see some things about our centennial celebration, talking about our dedication to Humboldt, for the past 100 years and the next 100. Here's a couple of our surfing docks. I will say that it's always great to get people who truly enjoy the outdoors on our medical staffs and in our community. We have a vision for 2025 as part of the centennial. Under better health outcomes, we've focused on development of primary care with our residency. We actually have a housing initiative, which is still in development. You'll hear more once that gets finalized, but some exciting housing, supportive housing initiatives. We want to continue to evolve our regional specialty care, medical education with the residency and other collaborations with Humboldt State as well as OHSU, and College of the Redwoods in a variety of specialty areas. We really want to enhance our patients and our caregiver experience, and then this idea of promoting healthcare peace of mind, making sure the community understands the resources we have, which isn't to say we have everything or that we're done yet, but so people understand what's available. One of the things that is near and dear to my heart is what we call our community health investment. Becky, who's on our call, is a leader in that realm. And this slide is a little bit older, but it speaks to our 5 family resource centers. We provide tremendous services, food and other mental health services and other things to people both who are homeless, kids who have food insecurity, and have a big commitment to ensuring that in addition to providing health care, that we're looking at the other social determinants of health and the things that make a healthy community. So I apologize because I often will try to put too much information into a brief presentation and then I talk very fast. But I wanted you to have a feel for what we were working on and then really give you a chance to ask any questions.
Thank you. That was great. That was super informative. Yeah, so go ahead, please. If you have questions, just make sure to unmute yourself and ask away.
Roberta, this is Joanne. Hi. I have a friend who is one of the survivors of COVID from a cruise, and she was told by the blood bank that they can't extract her plasma for possible use. Is that, I thought we could.
So North Coast Blood Bank hasn't set up to do it. So when we are providing COVID convalescent plasma to patients, but we're getting the plasma typically from Stanford or somewhere else. One of the reasons that North Coast hasn't set it up is really to set up that whole process. You're better off to do it in an area where there's a lot of COVID, so a lot of donors, before you set up the whole infrastructure. So they're working with other blood banks to get us what we need for treatment.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Any other questions?
So Roberta, this is Becky. So I know you're starting to do elective surgeries and that type of thing. So what is the mandate now of visiting patients or going into the hospital? Is it still pretty closed up, or what is happening?
It is. We certainly have, even through this, we have allowed visitors, just like most places around the country, under certain circumstances. End of life, minors need their parents, women in labor need at least their coach or whoever. So there's been that. We are constantly trying to balance that tension between keeping the whole hospital safe, the caregivers, the patients, and knowing the importance of people you love when you're sick. We've ordered special iPads for people who don't have cell phones and try to support virtual visits. So we've done some things to address that loss, but at the moment, it's been liberalized a little, but I will say with, California just had another, 8,000 cases yesterday. There's, people do come from outside areas, which, and we need kind of that uniform approach. So we're going to follow basically the CDC and CDPH guidance on this. It is, it's kind of with a heavy heart, but for the greater good at the moment.
Thanks.
I have a question. I was curious about, I hear people talk about they're going to take temperatures of customers as they come in. Is that effective, or doesn't it sometimes you don't know, you don't show symptoms?
It's true. So Where it becomes important is if someone has, it will rule out the people who are most symptomatic, and that's when you're the most contagious, but it's not a complete thing. That's why visitors aren't let in. Like if it were 100% effective, we could just take everyone's temperature and then say, come visit. But it does, asking about any symptoms, even subtle symptoms, and taking a temperature is just one barrier for people who are, you know, coming in with kind of, I'm mildly sick, I think I'm okay. So it is probably of some value, but incomplete.
Thanks.
That's where masks and social distancing becomes so important.
So are you advocating for people to go get tested to kind of have kind of a benchmark, or is it not, you know, I get mixed messages on the testing for COVID, what they're doing at Redwood Acres. So,
you know, our incidence is so low that I don't know how much value is for people just to go who've been really careful about social distancing. I would say that, you know, people who have any mild symptoms, suddenly, you know, you're sneezing where you weren't, you have a loss of, you know, sense of smell, you're achy, any of those things, I would get tested because we really want to know who's positive. The other group you might consider doing is if you've traveled to an area with higher incidence. So if you've gone down to LA or San Francisco and you're back, even if you feel well, you know, you might want to wait a few days because the incubation period, you know, wait 5 to 7 days. And then you might want to get tested just to see, well, if I had something brewing, it might show up by now. It's not perfect. That would be reasonable. In terms of the general testing, I would say that there will be a time when that will be of more value and it doesn't hurt, but I'm not really promoting it.
So do you predict that, I mean, Redwood Acres is going to stay up as an emergency. Are you working partnership with them, with St. Joe's for their,
yes. Yeah, they've asked us to run Redwood Acres. And so we are just finishing up. We have to get special waivers from the CDPH to, you know, see inpatients in that setting, but we've been working closely with public health on that. So the thought is if St. Joe's and Redwood are really full, then we would open Redwood Acres, which would have 96 beds. Similarly, Mad River has some beds that they can open outside of Mad River Hospital. And our concept would be that we would move patients into Redwood Acres when they are kind of at the tail end of their illness, low acuity, they need a little oxygen, they're pretty self-sufficient. Then as a step down to create capacity in the main hospitals for sicker patients. So that's how we would use it. And we've identified all the different pieces, how we'll get meals delivered there, how we'll, you know, nursing leadership. So there's a lot of work that's going on to be ready. And it's one of those things where you hope you never need it, but you want to be prepared with it.
right. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Well, it is 12:30, so that was just a great presentation. I really appreciate you being here and all your hard work and all the hard work of the hospital and the staff. And yeah, thank you.
Well, my pleasure. I will say that we've got an incredible team. And one of the things I have seen is just people coming together in a spirit of kind of collaboration and for the common good across, not just in my organization where I've got some amazing people, but communication with public health, with other Open Door, with whoever it is. You know, we've really tried to work as a community to make sure we're prepared. So I think that with all, even though this is so stressful, that hopefully some good comes of it. So Melanie, thanks for having me today. Thank you guys for joining, and look forward. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.